Hello and welcome. As part of my leadership series, I'm talking tonight with a performance artist. Patrick Scully is my guest. Many of you know him from Patrick's Cabaret that he founded back in 1986. He's been a dancer in the Twin Cities and also involved in many other forms of art. Since 1972, when he told me he performed his very first performance at the Walker. He was in 1992 voted by the New York Times one of the top artists in our country. And so I'm delighted to have you come down and talk about your life and about art and being an artist.
Great to be here, Mary. Thanks.
Welcome. How do you define the term performance artist?
Well, performance artist is actually, I think, a great category for miscellaneous. Because if you're a dancer and people are looking at what you're doing and they're thinking, this is really more theater than it is dance, they might say, you know, he's more of a theater artist. Mm-hmm. Whereas the theater artist might look at the same performance and think, well, that's really more of a dance piece than it is theater. You know, there's not really a plot, or for whatever reason they might give. But nobody's ever going to say, that wasn't really enough of a performance mm-hmm. art thing. Mm-hmm. And so performance art, for me, is a category that gives me the freedom to bring theater, dance, film, video, comedy, whatever tools I feel like are necessary for that creative moment mm-hmm. to bear on the moment without having to worry that somebody's going to feel like I stepped outside of the bounds of what I was supposed to be doing.
And performance art is more, should we say, in vogue now than it was back when you started too, isn't it? At least in terms of using that term.
As a term, it's definitely more established than it was when, let's say, when I was in college. The performance art that was happening at that time would have been mostly happenings that many of the organizers of the happenings were painters. And I think that's one of the reasons why they came to call them performance art, was because it was people doing visual art, but in a time-space mm-hmm. continuum. Mm-hmm. And so I think the label performance art came from those early experimental painters who were doing things live for the public.
Do you consider yourself primarily a dancer, a choreographer, an artist, if you had to pick?
If I had to pick, I would say that I'm a storyteller who moves well.
That's a good way to define yourself.
Thanks.
Yeah, storyteller who moves well. Did you grow up, I know you grew up here in Minneapolis, did you grow up in a family that was what we would call a real creative type family?
Absolutely not.
No.
No. My parents' major cultural interests were the Minnesota Vikings and duck hunting. And I might have gone to a handful of movies with my family as a kid, mostly like drive-in movies in the summertime. But the arts were in no way a major player in my growing up or even into high school, really.
Did your parents live, I know neither one are living, did they live long enough to see you succeeding in the arts?
They did, and it kind of puzzled my father, and my parents were divorced in the later part of their life. And I think my mother came to appreciate it, but it still was really very far afield from all of the rest of the things in her life. And so particularly because the dance form that I first got involved with, contact improvisation, was, you know, I mean, it would have been odd enough that I was a dancer, but then I was involved in this, what was then sort of avant-garde, postmodern form of dance that even some people in the dance world scratched their heads about. So for my parents to try to make sense of this was challenging. You know, my dad might sometimes say, well, you kids must really be fit to move like that. And that would be about as close as he would come to really being able to identify with it.
Or appreciate it. Was that hard for you as a little boy growing up with these artistic, you know, urges and leanings? And realizing you were very different from your parents?
Well, I don't know really that I had a sense of myself as an artist while I was still living at home with my family. I didn't take, when I was in high school, I did MC the variety show. And that was probably more the innate storyteller in me coming out than anything. And I took my first dance classes actually as an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota. So it wasn't really till my freshman year in college that I really stepped into the world of the performing arts in any way.
Were you in sports in high school?
No.
Sure, the basketball coach was
Well,
leaning on you a bit.
that basketball coach asked me once if I was interested in coming out for basketball, and I said no. And he never asked me again. But I went to high school not very far from here at Alexander Ramsey, it was called in those days, in Roseville. Now it's called Roseville Area High School. But I graduated in 1971, and that was during the Vietnam War. And it was very obvious that the coaches in our high school were mostly men who had gone to college on the GI Bill. And they brought, from my perspective, to coaching a team, a kind of military attitude and experience that for me did not fit with the tenor of the times, which was to begin to question the war. And so how do you question the war in Vietnam and participate in somebody's athletic team that feels like a little sort of
Sergeant,
military squad without guns? And so I played football as a younger kid, but ninth grade was the last year that I played in any kind of organized sports. And then after ninth grade, I just had more interesting things to do with my time.
When you took that first dance class at the U, did you just kind of fall in love with dance?
Yeah, I think what happened for me was in those first dance classes, there was, the kind of thing that might draw a person to be in sports in terms of that involvement with your body and the physicality of it, but it gave me an opportunity to explore that without it having to be about competition and fear of winning or losing or somebody beating me, or in football terms, fear of getting hurt, getting smashed by somebody twice your size and breaking a bone. And so it allowed me that kind of physical exuberance without the frame of athletics being forced around it. And so that was exciting to me.
I've been telling Patrick about my daughter, Camille, who some of you know of, who is a dancer, and knowing what dancers go through via her, a dancer is an athlete in the strongest use of the term.
Yeah. As a dancer, your body is your instrument. And so you have to know your instrument, know how to take care of your instrument, know how to work with it, as opposed to, from at least my perspective, trying to conquer it, how to nurture it.
Did you have a mentor, Patrick?
I did, and I would say I do. Came along later in my career in dance, but years ago there was an organization in the Twin Cities called MICA, the Minnesota Independent Choreographers Alliance. And I remember at a MICA meeting at one point sitting next to another dancer in town, a guy named Bill Heron. And Bill made this off-the-cuff sort of remark to me. He said, "Patrick, have you ever seen Remy Charlap's work?" And I said, "No." And he said, "If you ever get a chance, check out Remy's work. I think you would really like it." And so when I was 30 and living in Washington, D.C., I'd left the Twin Cities, sort of working my way closer to New York. I saw that Remy was going to be teaching this workshop for male dancers in New York. And so I thought, the time is now, and I signed up for that workshop and was driving to, and through that suggestion from Bill Heron, got to know Remy through that workshop, came to then dance in Remy's company, moved to New York, and was really Remy's support and belief in me as an artist that gave me more courage and more permission to believe in myself.
That is a major statement,
Yeah.
isn't it? Say it again.
So Remy's belief in me as an artist, I mean, he was a successful, accomplished dancer, choreographer, children's book author, theater artist, you know, this Renaissance man of the arts, and that he took me seriously as a dancer and as an artist allowed me to take myself more seriously and to really believe that, yeah, I am.
What a gift and what a fortunate turning point, really,
Yeah.
to go to his class, to stick with him then. Oh, that's very interesting how that made that much of a difference. Do you sometimes look back in life and think, wow, if that guy hadn't come up to me in class and mentioned this, how different my life might have been, whether it was that comment or another.
You know, those, and you wonder, I wondered, like, when on a daily basis, maybe I say something like that to somebody else that
will
opens
influence
something up
them.
and so you never really know what's going to be the little trigger that's going to cause the snow to turn into an avalanche and change the whole landscape.
That's a really neat thing to ponder. I had a woman ask me one or two things years ago that got me thinking that led to starting the show. And for me, I think back, wow, just one, question from her and turned my life in another direction. Well, going back, so you're in New York now, working with Remy.
Right.
Take us through the next years. You came back here in '86. Give us a little bit of the chronology in between.
So in 1984, I moved to New York to dance with Remy and his company there. And we did a show in November of that year called 10 Men that was part of the Next Wave Festival at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And it was really sort of my opportunity to be dancing in the big time, And then after that, it was clear that there would continue to be some work opportunities with Remy, but it wasn't going to be full time like it had been getting ready for that concert. And I had an opportunity to come back and actually do a job working in Duluth in January of '85, Washington Junior High School in Duluth. They were interested in having somebody with dance and theater experience work with the junior high school kids who were into breakdancing. So the principal brought me back to work with these kids, and we put together a show, and it was really one of those Charlie Brown moments where, the goat turns into the hero, and the kids who were, borderline dropout kind of headed were all of a sudden like the most revered kids in the school because they had done this amazing show. And then one thing led to another, and I just kind of stayed here in Minneapolis and then traveled to New York or traveled with Remy to other places, to Boston, to Los Angeles, to Amsterdam, but in a sort of pickup company fashion where I didn't need to be living full time in New York. And then at some point then, I think must have been '85, I actually kind of officially moved back to the Twin Cities and have off and on, again, then had this, it's been my home since then.
And your vision or your motivation for starting Patrick's Cabaret?
I didn't have a motivation for starting Patrick's Cabaret. It was an accident. So it started, and it turns out that what I did grew into something, but it wasn't with the intention that that would be what was going to happen.
So it evolved, so to speak.
Exactly.
And how, for those who may be listening and watching and saying, Patrick's Cabaret, I've heard of it, but what is it if they haven't attended anything there?
Patrick's Cabaret is a performing space in South Minneapolis, right at Lake and Minnehaha. And we present a format of almost exclusively local artists, and anything that might be on stage is welcome on stage at Patrick's Cabaret.
Like open mic,
well,
isn't
it's in the spirit of open mic, but it's more consciously curated because In an open mic, you sort of set out the invitation and then you wait
Right.
and see
Anyone-
who shows up.
right.
But if you're curating, you put out the open mic, you see who shows up, and then you start thinking who isn't showing up. And you go out and
What
look
would
for
match?
those. And you go out and look for those people, because we live in a kind of world where privilege operates in such a way that if you've grown up with privilege, you feel like it's okay to respond to an open mic. But if you haven't grown up with privilege, you might think, well, maybe that's just a guy thing, or maybe that's just for white people, or maybe that's just for straight people, or maybe that's just for people without disabilities, or any of a number of ways in which any of us feel marginalized from the mainstream can condition us to feel like this isn't maybe for us. And so, but Patrick's Cabaret has that spirit of an open mic, in that the invitation is hopefully extended to everybody to come and be a part of it. And then in an evening, it's sort of like vaudeville used to be, where it's not one person doing the whole night or one company doing the whole night. You get your 15 minutes, I get my 15 minutes, she gets her 15 minutes, that group gets their 15 minutes. And so the evening consists of 6 unrelated acts in a way that vaudeville used to be. But it's the job of the performance coordinator to figure out then, well, what's going to be a good opening act? What's going to be a good closing act? How do we shape all of this together?
So more purposeful, by
So
far.
it's more purposeful than an open mic would be, but still in that spirit.
If we have time, I want to ask, this sounds philosophically so much like a purposeful start for Patrick's Cabaret, but I'll come back to that question if we have time. I want to really bring in your coming out as a gay man and your dealing for 25 years with being HIV positive, because that's informed, as they say, a lot of your work, hasn't it?
Right. So when I first started dancing professionally, I was dancing here with a company called Contact Works. It was the late 1970s. And in that time, as I was coming out as a gay man and coming to understand myself and find my place in the world, I started to feel like, in that way in which the personal is the political, and I needed to take that personal political and move it into the artwork and have something to say to the world with that. And as the only gay man in the company, I felt like I needed to leave the company to figure out more how it was that I was going to do that, because some of these concerns of mine weren't the primary concerns of other people in the company. And so I left Contact Works sort of on a personal exploration to figure out, well, what was I going to do? Was I going to keep dancing? Was I going to do other things? How was I going to bring who I was as a gay man more clearly to the work that I was doing?
And it sounds like you felt you did not want to keep that under a basket. You wanted to be open.
Yeah, and it actually irritated me that if I was like on stage dancing and the person I was dancing with was a woman, that everybody would read that as a romantic duet. That it might not be a brother and sister or two people who are friends or whatever. There's this Western propensity to like see a man and a woman dancing. It's like, has to be romance, Couldn't be like a gay man and a straight female friend of his or whatever. And so there was a way in which I didn't want to continue to contribute to the invisibility of gay people. I wanted to actually turn that around and say, hello, there are gay men in dance. That's not a surprise to anybody, but what was surprising with the wave of people that I was involved with post-Stonewall was that there were some of us who were willing to start to be visible as gay men on stage.
And you were early in that sense. I mean, when you think back now how much more open our society is and our culture is.
Yeah, in those days, I actually had it said to me in one of the proto Artist in the Schools gigs through the State Arts Board, where I was going to work in a junior high school in the northern suburbs here. And one of the teachers, at a big congratulatory moment as everybody's around the table and the contracts are being signed from this junior high school, says to me, "Patrick, I want you to know how happy we are to have a really masculine man coming to teach dance at our school." And I processed that really quickly. And I looked back and the room was silent, and I said, if by that you mean you're glad you didn't get a faggot, I'm really sorry to disappoint you.
And
Because
he
it
said,
made me mad. She.
oh, it was a she.
It was a woman. And she didn't know what to say.
I bet.
You know, and I don't think anybody in the room knew what to say. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I probably just lost a lot of future jobs. But you know what? I thought, I would rather not work with the people who would not hire me because of what I just said.
And not be authentic.
And then I would rather lose that work than go there and not be able to be authentic and be myself. You know, and I had to just trust in that moment that the universe would provide me with enough opportunities to connect with people if I was willing to be open and honest and be who I was. And it was in some ways a scary thing to do because I didn't have a lot of role models for that. There weren't people in the dance world who were showing me that, like, you can just be openly gay and be a dancer and let the world know about it and even make dances about it and talk about it when you're teaching in a junior high school, and the world will be okay.
Bill T. Jones wasn't.
Bill T. Jones was
at that
dancing,
point,
but he
was
wasn't. He wasn't where he was in his career at that point. Right.
And did you get the job?
Oh, the job was through the Minneapolis Urban Arts Program, was the fiscal agent for it. And Minneapolis had gay rights as part of their civil rights protection. And so even though I was working out in the suburb, the contract was through a Minneapolis entity. And so if they tried to break the contract, that I would sue them. And so
you
they
were
didn't.
safe, so to
And
speak.
so, yeah, I had that legal protection.
What has been, I just got a cue, we're 5 minutes away from having to say good night, but what's been the hardest thing for you as a leader in the arts in your career so far, Patrick?
Wow. The biggest challenge for me, I think, has actually been that I have the competency to do all of the things that one needs to do to be a successful arts administrator, but it's not a good fit for me psychically. And so it's really easy to get drawn into doing arts administration because it needs to be done. If you don't do it, you're not going to have opportunities as an artist, or your organization is going to fall apart or whatever. But I found that over the years, it left me depleted. And I never became an artist in order to become an arts administrator. I did the administration sort of like we all have to do our taxes, or like we have to do the dishes, or the stuff that needs to be done. But I found that I could more consistently get paid for being an arts administrator than I could for being an artist. And so it became very seductive to put most of my time into administration. Because it provided a financial reward.
And that eats up all that time you could be
it not only eats up the time, but it eats up, I find, really the psychic energy that I need for being an artist. And the kind of attention that administrative work demands, I've experienced as a very linear kind of thing. And the kind of time I need for being an artist is a very non-linear kind of dream space, free-floating, not having a plan what I'm going to do. Exactly. It's a different part of the brain. And so for me what I had to do was I realized I have to leave arts administration because it left me dealing with serious issues of depression. And I had to figure out then how to be able to successfully turn Patrick's Cabaret over to other people to carry it on, so that I could free myself to go back and being an artist.
Which you have done successfully. We're out of time. I want to pause just for a second before we say goodbye and ask you to take your pen and pencil out. And if you want to learn more, I'm sure he's got your interest. If you haven't followed his career, you can go to www.patrickscully.org and read more about what he's doing, what he just recently did, a great performance called Thrive, which you're going to
I hope in the next year to remount Thrive.
Remount. Well, we've got just a minute and a half left. What has been the best thing, and I really get what you say about the administrative part. What's been the best thing for you in terms of your career as an artist? Not the money,
Right.
not the business part of it, just the chance to create, or what would you
You know, my
say?
life as an artist has given me opportunities to go places in the world and to do and create things to shape my own life, rather than to follow a path that others might have suggested I follow. My choice to be an artist has given me an opportunity to craft a life that is truly of my own design. And in the process of doing that, I've also been able to inspire other people to make the similar choices for themselves, whether it's as artists or as gay and lesbian people to be out, or as people living with HIV to be more open about it. And I think that's really the most satisfying thing, because it's allowed me to live what's really Patrick Scully's life.
And that is not a small thing, is it? I mean, what a gift in a way to be
Yeah.
able to pursue your passion.
Yeah,
To
because
do
you know,
what
when
you
we're
want.
taking in our last breath, it doesn't matter how much money you've got in the bank, but what matters is, did you spend your life doing what you really wanted to do?
With that very important question, we need to say goodnight. Thank you so much
Oh,
for coming down. It's
You're
been
very welcome,
great.
Mary.
Thank you for joining us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.